All right, Greg and Jeremy are here. Good Wednesday morning to everybody. September 8th, 2021. We're going to run over some stories.
Yes, this is another, you call it test drive, I guess. We did this back in January, and definitely the goal of being more consistent with this in the future, getting this out here. Little pre-September 11th morning news and story update, I guess we call this. And I'm glad to be doing this with you this morning, Jeremy, here on 3 days before the 20th anniversary of the most faithful event of our generation.
Yes, Greg. Good to be with you and to keep our eye on the ball here. And we have a good few bits of stories that will then lead into an understanding of the nature of the collective psychology that is being engendered as we approach the 20th anniversary of September 11th. But then also keeping our eyes on the ball after the date. We've talked before on the AnteDote about not giving in to a cult, a calendrical cult, or a cult of numerology, 9/11. We like to try to rehistoricize things. And so that's some of what we want to do with your morning AnteDote is rehistoricize the headlines.
Rehistoricize and destigmatize.
And rehistoricize and destigmatize the headlines. All right, let's play the intro. Yes, and let's play the intro now. And thank you very much, John Swin, for making this intro for us. All right, let's go.
We must speak the truth about terror. Let us never tolerate outrageous conspiracy theories, malicious lies that attempt to shift the blame away from the terrorists themselves.
Huh? What happens? I tell you what happens. Blam!
I have a window that looks directly at the World Trade Center, and I saw...
No collusion! Shit's getting way too complicated for me.
And, all right, here we are. Where's Greg, though? I got to get Greg up here.
I am here. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you, but I got to add you here. Let's see here.
Okay.
Sorry about that.
Ah, there I am.
Yeah. I wanted to add you to the left because you're such a leftist, Greg. Hold on. Oh, shoot. Oh, no, Greg, come back. Oh, no. All right, I lost Greg. Apologize for that. I hope he's coming back. Okay, Greg's joining. Very good. Sorry about that. Greg.
Oh.
That was my bad.
Oh no, I'm back. All right, I'm on the left side. I can work with that.
Oh yeah. Okay, good. All right. Sorry about the rough way here, people, but we're going to get there. We're going to figure this out.
On the job training, but hey, that's how you learn.
Yeah. All right. So, we're going to start with, let's see here. Trying to get into our stories here. All right. There we go. Let me see here. All right, so we have, we're starting with an interesting story about Bolsonaro. Greg, you want to tell us about this one?
Yeah, this is actually from, I believe this is actually from an Indian website, thewire.in, titled, "In Brazil, Bolsonaro is plotting a Trump-like coup to try and save his flailing regime." And Jennifer Cohn, who is Jenny Cohn 1 on Twitter, she's been one of the best, most outstanding sources on issues related to election fraud and election issues, as far as elections go in our country domestically, she's been really putting together a lot of dots with the Bolsonaro family and this global movement, as far as people like Steve Bannon, Bolsonaro's own son, being in Washington D.C. on January 6th, and being involved with Mike Lindell's cyber symposium, Mike Lindell's attempt to prove that the election was stolen from Donald Trump in 2020. And in this article, it gets into some scandals with the Bolsonaro administration. And very interestingly, what I found most interesting, as far as this potential of Bolsonaro to try to carry out some type of coup style. And of course, Brazil has a history with military coups. I mean, there was a 20-year military coup during the height of the Cold War, from the 60s to the 1980s, a military government. And it gets into how as it relates to what happened in the U.S. and what may or may not have been attempted to have happened in Israel, Netanyahu's last days, what Bolsonaro might try to do to keep power in the case of potentially losing an election, October of 2022. And it's very interesting. I found a parallel with the language of Stephen Bannon, talking about how Bolsonaro is going to be up against a criminal, and that this is a bastion, a refuge against the the globalist onslaught and all this. It was very similar to Tucker Carlson interviewing Viktor Orban of Hungary, and talking about how Orban is basically Hungary's last hope against some type of American liberal led effort to try to subvert the will of the people in Hungary. So the players and the actors, as we've been identifying for a few years now, are very similar in terms of what's happened in the U.S. with Trump and all that's come with him, what's happened in places like Hungary and Europe in general, and Brazil with Bolsonaro as a key piece of this more global based effort in multiple areas of the world. You could throw in, of course, Israel and Netanyahu. There's Putin. There's even the Philippines with the Duterte. So Bolsonaro being a major part of this. And this article is taking recent events in Brazil, as well as Jenny Cohn's thread, and tying together the connections with what happened here in the U.S. At the very least, and the reasons why there is a much need for concern, or at the very least to have to be on notice of the potential of another major player in this global push to I don't quite know the right terms to use for it, but this what we've been identifying for the past several years here with 11/9 and Trump and all these other players, and Bolsonaro fitting right into this as a major part of this, and why there very well could be a January 6th or worse there. And so I would recommend this article here from the wire.in, as well as the work of Jennifer Cohn at Jenny Cohn 1 on Twitter, who I think's really done a lot of great work in putting together connecting this basically to what happened here in our country, here in the United States, and why this matters globally. So,
Thank you for that, Greg. And so what's interesting is what folks may notice next time we do the morning antidote on our opening screen, one of the videos on the opening screen is Greg talking directly to then candidate Senator Bernie Sanders in Iowa after an alleged town forum of some sort about this exact issue. And that's exactly what you brought up with him. And he was resonating, and then his handlers moved you on to so the next person could take a photo. But then I would also point out that another one, or maybe even two of the other videos, is me attempting to question then candidate Senator Bernie Sanders, also in Iowa, about questions about the Jedi Pentagon cloud infrastructure and how tied in it was via Microsoft potentially at that time. It was potential at that time to the potential top levels of Israeli military intelligence, and then what that means in terms of the back door to some of these other this transnational authoritarian syndicate and the synarchists, basically, the sort of the neo-fascist element of the authoritarian desired world order types, and how this is a network. And of course, I believe it's a different Bolsonaro's son than Eduardo, who's so intimately involved in the American 1-6, but also in being announced by Bannon as the leader of the in Brazil of the of the quote unquote populist move. They just call it the movement. But
Yes.
one of the Bolsonaro sons, of course, is infamous for wearing the Mossad T-shirt, right? Which is just I find that sort of wild at some level. The son or daughter of a leader of a country wearing the shirt of a foreign intelligence service, whether or not it's seen as an ally or not. There's just something very, very odd and weird about all
It
of
was
that.
two sons of Bolsonaro, actually. Eduardo, who's been pegged as the leader of this Latin American uh, aspect of the movement, was one of the sons who's been seen wearing Mossad and Israeli army shirts. So it's Eduardo and another son by the name of Carlos. So.
And so here is Eduardo. Bolsonaro meets Donald Trump in New York. This is just from last month. And then that's from a Brazilian website, the Brazilian Report. And then the World Socialist website reports what was Eduardo Bolsonaro doing in Washington during the January 6th coup.
And interestingly, in the both in the when he met Trump in New York last month in August. That was just before he was at Mike Lindell, Mike Lindell's cyber symposium in Sioux Falls, South Dakota, which attempted to prove that the election was rigged. And just before the events of January 6th, he was in D.C. also meeting with Lindell. And at the very least, Mike Lindell is obviously the crucial, most identifiable, probably public face with trying to directly overturn the 2020 election, very close with the whole Bannon crew that's behind this, largely behind, at least publicly, this global effort to the global movement, so to speak, in terms of bringing in quote unquote populist nationalists on a global level. So directly relating Bolsonaro to the at least as far as being in the vicinity of the events of January 6th, as well as this more recent attempt to try to prove that the 2020 election was stolen. So,
and as you pointed out before, the rhetoric is very similar in terms of
yes.
There's a strong parallel with the MAGA movement in the United States. And of course, Bannon is the obviously key connector. We already know that Bannon was part of the Cambridge Analytica operation as an associate, as an employee, really, of a contractor of Robert Mercer and Robert Mercer's network. And we have asserted that you can break down the rise of Trumpism in terms of the public rhetoric to a combination of understanding neurolinguistic programming and simple, very visual 3-word phrases such as lock her up or build the wall, combined with, what'd you say? Drain the swamp. Thank you very much. The most infamous. And combined with the psychometrically tuned via dozens of millions of Americans' Facebook data, other social media data, psychographical warfare, i.e. fed to them via their networks. Thus you begin to enter into your own political echo chamber of a construction of someone else's warfare, psychological hybrid warfare on you. And so just the last thing I'd say is that it apparently Bannon, when he called Bolsonaro's main competitor, Lula, who had already been locked up, lock him up, right? He was already locked up. I believe Bannon called Lula the most dangerous leftist in the world, which resonates a lot with the sort of hyper politicization of the sort of the two wings of the partisan bird in the United States, where, as we all know, under QAnon and Trump, MAGA, Obama, and Clinton's, they became the communist demonic left that were doing all kinds of horrid things, and meanwhile, this whole question of this transnational movement and how it's potentially one of the major points, at the very least, in terms of the long-term counterintelligence cultivation of this network, including Donald Trump, but we might say it's populated in the United States. The GOP is populated by a long-term Russian intelligence operation that is then transnational. Obviously, Bibi, Netanyahu, Israel, but also then into Brazil. We talked about Hungary and Orban, right? So this is a transnational quote unquote movement, and it's highly synthetic. It's not organic. It's not populist at all. It takes advantage of the populist hindbrain and drives it with super sadistic, the hybrid warfare frontal neocortex memes that are not your friend.
Yeah, and it's doing that on a global scale. And it's very global in nature, and it uses these common grievances, both real and exaggerated, of people in of people in different countries throughout the world as a means to manipulate and to as far as to meet goals. And so it's very powerful. And I don't know if we still understand like the depths of just how powerful these types of operations are in terms of influencing people and playing on their fears and playing on their legitimate concerns. And that's still, like, we could talk forever about it, but we should probably start to
We'll
move
move
on
on.
here.
But you're right, though, and someone like Mike Lindell, who you've been focusing on, Greg, too, I think is crucial because he plays the role of the sort of goofball, the sweethearted former, resolved crack addict who's made good, and he's all over Infowars. All of the sort of the those who did 11/9. Alex Jones did 11/9. Look for the John Swin T-shirt coming soon.
Yeah.
And
Even praying with Rick Wiles of True News. I mean, it's just all over the
yes,
place.
and doing his hybrid warfare uh, event about hybrid warfare, really, and people like Seth Abramson point out very properly that Lindell is the key nodal point of pushing. They're open about saying they're getting this information, and it's very likely mis or disinformation from foreign intelligence sources. They're open about that. What we're not being told is exactly who all is actually behind it. So we're going to move on to an interesting story that you've found, Greg, here, titled "Bipartisan Group to Introduce Bill Promoting U.S.-Israel AI Artificial Intelligence Cooperation Legislation." The bill is a House counterpart to Senate legislation introduced in June on joint artificial intelligence development. Key issue here.
Yeah, and so this was a follow-up of a bill that was introduced by Senators Marco Rubio, Maria Cantwell of Washington, Marsha Blackburn of Tennessee, and I believe Jackie Rosen of Nevada. And this one, I believe, has 5 House sponsors. And there were a few of the names that stuck out as being interesting to me. One is Michael Waltz. We've dealt a little bit with Michael Waltz before, the former Green Beret in Afghanistan who became Dick Cheney's counterterrorism advisor in the last part of the Bush administration. There's also Representative, I believe his name is Jake Out. I might butcher his last name, Auchincloss, and he has long-term connections with one of his uncles being married into to Jackie Kennedy's mother, First Lady Jackie Kennedy's mother. Also connections to the WASP, the Bundy family, McGeorge and William Bundy, and I actually replaced a member of the Kennedy family, Joseph Kennedy III, when he ran for Senate unsuccessfully in Massachusetts last year. And then there's also, this is just one more example of just the Anthony Gonzalez of Ohio. Representative, one of the Republicans who actually voted for impeachment, is also co-sponsoring this. So there you can see with somebody like that, one of the Republicans who took the brave stand against Trump, you can kind of see the limits to the brave stands in terms of something like that. And of course, the article mentions that AIPAC sees this as right there, as you can see right there, AIPAC. The legislation is also supported by AIPAC, which views it as furthering U.S.-Israeli economic and national security cooperation, according to its spokesman, Marshall Whitman. And then at the end of the article, Michael Waltz, the former Afghan Green Beret Cheney counterterrorism advisor, talks about how crucial it is to our national security to support this artificial intelligence and why it makes the world a safer place. And there's even above a line about as America moves away from the forever wars, why this is important. So it's very interesting to hear language about the forever wars and how this type of legislation, this type of research, this type of collaborating is going to be part of the next step to the next step as far as removing us from the forever war. So that's very interesting, bringing in like even like the eternal endless war into. And I believe that was one of the Democratic sponsors of this bill, as opposed to you usually hear that from like the pseudo anti-war Republican types who talk about like we need to end the wars, but also Israel's our greatest ally. So
This is
very very
very
interesting on a number of accounts.
Yeah, and thank you for focusing on this, Greg, because there's two key pieces about this. First of all, is artificial intelligence, and there's very big questions about that in relationship to our human future. That's one thing, and we don't have time to go into all of that now, but we'll continue to analyze that. But then there's this very national aspect and national security aspect and geopolitical aspect in terms of exactly what you pointed out here. Even Biden himself said, as they withdrew from Afghanistan, that was going to give more space to support allies in the Middle East. I believe the way that he put it. And the one thing that I would point out is I believe this is part of what we've been tracing over many years. One thing that we pointed out a few times over the course of the Trump administration was the role of what we titled the cyber umbrella as a follow-up to the nuclear umbrella. And there was a key a person who Trump put on his intelligence committee alongside Feinberg from DynCorp, but Suzanne, what's her name, Diana Ravitch, who worked with Cheney, and her main thing was that there needed to be that Israel was not just a junior partner or an ally of the United States, but along with the UK, US, and Israel was key to basically what you might see as a 21st century replica for the age of terror and cyber, similar to NATO and the US under the Cold War, the idea of a nuclear umbrella. And what she was proposing was a cyber umbrella with the US, Israel, and UK as the key partners. And I believe that this is a large part of it. And as we'll move into some future stories here, we'll also see that this I believe, is a key thing to keep our eye on in terms of the Biden administration, that this is where whereas the Trump administration was not only potentially very obviously compromised by Israeli elements, but also intensely by Russian elements in terms of his long-term history. With the Biden administration, there is a very strong Israeli component to it that needs to have an eye kept on it.
Yeah, and the last thing I'll say about this is this also interrelated to all of this, and this is something we're not going to cover today that maybe we should get into in the future. Jeremy, is Israel recently being absorbed as part of Central Command, U.S. Central Command. So there's that in the picture as well, and that looks like it's might be interrelated to the geopolitics of like the U.S.-Israel relationship. But I'm not going to comment up on that right now, but that is happening right now. Israel currently being absorbed into U.S. Central Command. So that will be a topic to come back to in the future. But this right here, definitely, you see like just the more things change, the more they stay the same in terms of this whole cooperation with our greatest ally goes. So.
And speaking of our greatest quote-unquote ally, before the weekend, before Labor Day on Monday, and by the way, a happy belated Labor Day to everybody, a happy Rosh Hashanah to people. Meanwhile, people don't understand that Rosh Hashanah is actually about the blasting of sound, the new year to blast. So we're putting people on blast here in honor of both Labor Day and Rosh Hashanah, I would say. But meanwhile, and related to our quote unquote greatest ally, the Biden cybersecurity, the head cybersecurity czar is a woman named Ann Neuberger, who we've talked about before, who has direct ties to AIPAC. Her husband is a big AIPAC official. They have a fund where they have $500,000 where they donate directly to AIPAC, which is a partisan operation with a spying background of a foreign government. And there's more to that. But so before the weekend, Ann Neuberger said that there was a cyber threat over the holidays. White House doubles down on warning about cyber attacks over the holidays. And if you've been paying attention to some of the financial news, you'll see that Ann Neuberger's all over it, pushing the American corporate sector to unify their cyber security approaches and software. And I don't imagine she's talking about a public option where the NSA or Cyber Command actually has our own US based tools to protect the corporations. I imagine she's talking about things such as Microsoft and cloud app security and Adalom, which comes directly out of the highest levels of Israeli military intelligence, and Talpiot. And so this is a very, very worrisome issue here.
Yeah, it's just one of a number of fronts where you get all these warnings before September 11th, whether it's about refugees coming in from Afghanistan who might be terrorists, or whether it's the next September 11th type event itself, which has been talked about for years as being potentially a cyber event. I mean, the refusal and the inability to even attempt to really make a serious attempt to get to the bottom of what really happened on that day is just continuing to enable all of these actors. And we'll get into another one of the bad actors putting out threats here in a few minutes, but continually able to put out these warnings about the dangers that we continue to face. So on the 20th anniversary, very ominous for warnings from somebody like Neuberger about cyber attacks. Anyway,
and luckily there was no big grid down cyber attack over the Labor Day holiday. And who knows exactly, I'm not sure which holidays, if she was just limiting it to Labor Day, but I imagine. But I think the resonance that you point out with September 11th is crucial, because remember about the systems are blinking red. And so when we have the driving up of the public awareness and potential fear around a cyber attack, as we've seen over the course of actually the last year has been intense in terms of that, everywhere from the solar winds to all the way to the World Economic Forum saying that there's going to be a cyber pandemic. So when you combine all of that, you begin to get into a sense of almost like a precognition type of scenario in relationship to cyber threats. And that could then obviously be something like a covert operation or a false flag cyber operation, which seem to be some of the easiest to pull off in terms of attribution. So we'll just go quickly, flip through these stories. This is David Korn from Mother Jones, who did the write-up early in the year. A top Biden cybersecurity aide donated over $500,000 to AIPAC as an NSA official. I believe she's now the top Biden cybersecurity aide. And this goes over the story of her husband and her. There's interesting stuff in here. A rising official in 2019. They started a whole new section, basically, that she then headed up under Trump. And now she has become the head cybersecurity czar under Biden. And she has direct ties to the American Israel Public Affairs Committee via her husband and top donations. And then David Korn, who's Jewish himself, I believe, is then attacked by StopAntisemitism.org. NBC, which followed up on the story, Mother Jones spread anti-Semitic Jewish quote-unquote dual loyalty libel against Orthodox woman working in the Biden administration. So during this Rosh Hashanah, as a Jewish American patriot of conscience, as we head towards Yom Kippur, atonement, I would assert that there is a struggle inside the Jewish community, a political struggle inside the Jewish community. And these assertions and allegations of anti-Semitism around basic factual issues around questions of geopolitics and national security are not going to be accepted at all anymore. And we're going to have a conversation about the facts.
And indeed we are, and even mainstream people like David Korn, who, as you've talked about before, Jeremy, one of the early attack dogs against the 9/11 truthers early on, I believe within a year of September 11, 2001. Even somebody like him, I mean, he's is still like when but still even faces like these types of charges for writing an article about Ann Neuberger's connection. So it's like, and of course, that's not to say like David Korn is like, himself one of like anywhere near the good guys or anything, but it's interesting like just how far and pervasive that label goes, even to people like David Korn, who's done his own yeoman's work in terms of keeping and perpetuating these official narratives. So
That's a great point. And here's some more background on David Korn reporting on the background of Ann Neuberger about the question of quote unquote dual loyalty. And all he was pointing out in that other article was the fact that they had donated money to AIPAC, American Israel Public Affairs Committee. But meanwhile, he'd done an important article late summer, August 11th, 2020, titled "The White House Kodak Controversy Has a New Angle: A Billionaire's Huge Stock Gift to a Synagogue. Why did investor George Carfunkel donate shares worth up to $180 million to a little-known congregation?" And by the way, so Ann Neuberger is not, as they tried to portray her in these attacks from the sort of fake anti-Semites, they try to pretend that she's just some sort of hardworking, upcoming, humble Orthodox Jewish woman from potentially humble backgrounds. And for some reason, they fail to mention that her parents are billionaires. George Garfunkel is her dad. He's a billionaire from way back. This is where she got her start in cyber, was working for his company. And meanwhile, it looks like apparently there was some kind of deal with Kushner in the Trump administration with the COVID payoffs, and they were able to acquire Kodak and then sort of make it tax-free in terms of their shares by creating a sort of a front corporation that was a ultra-Orthodox synagogue, allegedly. Okay, so this is the background here. And then finally, in terms of actual quote-unquote dual loyalty, we pointed out that this is not just an Orthodox Jewish woman. That's not the issue. No one's saying that's the issue. I mean, maybe someone's saying, but we're not saying that. David Korn's not saying that. The issue here is not just the AIPAC donations or this very, very sketchy question in relationship to her parents and what that all means, but also the fact that her parents were saved on the Antabi operation by Netanyahu's unit at Sayeret Metkal. Yes. So obviously we pointed out that just deeply in an emotional and psychological way, someone who has parents who have been saved by the top levels of a foreign country's military intelligence services, special forces services, there's just an inherent question of over and just sort of like existential loyalty in some way that needs to be called into question alongside AIPAC and this Kodak controversy.
Indeed.
All right, should we move on?
Yeah, let's let's move on to our next story. And here's a classic example. Like, I mean, we mentioned the lack of accountability, to say the least, in the enabling of bad actors at the very least. I mean, Tony Blair is much worse than a bad actor, but to continue to push propaganda talking points and continue to perpetuate this narrative that we've had in place many cases before, but that was definitely magnified and perpetuated to a scale unlike before with the events of September 11th and the still to this day lack of accountability and answers and true investigation into how and why it really happened. And here's Tony Blair now on the eve of the 20th anniversary of September 11th, warning that the West should prepare for a bioterrorism threat. And of course, with Tony Blair and Islamism's mentioned in this article and the threats. And so, Tony Blair here, an unrepentant war criminal, much like our own administration here in the U.S., still 20 years of walking around free. I mean, there was a controversy in the UK about the lies, which led to the UK's support for the Iraq War, right there with Blair, Bush, but still nothing in the realm of like anything to keep the people, Tony Blair, much less the people behind him, the people around him, any type of accountability whatsoever. I mean, these are continuing to be the consequences of this. A guy like Tony Blair, who, much like George W. Bush, there have been all these attempts to whitewash his legacy and rehabilitate him. And This is just these are the consequences of just continuing to allow these criminals to run free and present themselves as philanthropists and people who are trying to do good in the world. You still get these same old tired warnings of the threat of Islamism and how we still have to keep our guard up against future attacks. And so it's really sad and pathetic to see.
So, COVID was not enough of a bioterrorism threat, Tony Blair? And by the way, there's the whole UK connection to 9/11, the Iraq War. That's a crucial piece here, and there's a struggle obviously inside of the UK, just as there was inside of the United States, that we don't know that much about publicly. I would include people to look at things like Dr. David Kelly, the questions of the relationship of his death to not only the coming fraud of the Iraq War, but also the question of bioterrorism, really. And we covered this a little bit in a previous AnteDote long form that dealt with the aspects of David Kelly. So there's that, and then I would also point out the scenario that was well covered by Johnny Vedmore of Nicole Junkerman on Jeffrey Epstein's private airplane at a Leslie Wexner mansion in the hills outside of the UK's NSA, the GCHQ, in the run-up to what was now been outed as the intelligence being fixed around the policy, and the whistleblower in the GCHQ context of Catherine Gunn, and calling that out as they were heading towards some of these elements inside of the UK, heading to what I believe she was saying, that they were going to fraud it up or they were going to push it into the UN. And this man, Tony Blair, is the public head of mass war crimes that led to the death of millions and millions of human beings. Okay, Greg, we only have about 5 minutes here. So let's just run through these. What I would suggest that these last articles, we should do a full long form AnteDote podcast about, because they're so important around September 11th and the media and the framing of all of that, if that's cool.
Agreed,
but we'll just sort
agreed.
of read the headlines to say that what we're focused on right now.
Yeah, sounds good.
Okay, here is a tweet from Carol Rosenberg from September 5th. Good afternoon from Guantanamo Bay, Camp Justice, right? Okay. TV crews and legal teams are getting set up for next week's resumption of the 9/11 pretrial hearings, a mostly administrative session. For the first time since February 2020, proceedings were paralyzed by the pandemic. And then Anthony Heford says the hearings weren't frozen by the pandemic. They were stopped in their tracks when attorney James P. Harrington quit on the first day of the February hearings. Can you believe this? There's still not even been a fraudulent military trial set up by post 9/11 legislation, really. 20 years later.
Mm-hmm. And it's been a decade since neocon warmongers were complaining about KSM, Khalid Sheikh Mohammed, getting a civilian trial. I mean, and they're still not even getting anywhere with this. And Carol Rosenberg, by the way, covers Guantanamo Bay issues for the New York Times. So that's going to be kicking back into high gear this week, I guess. And within the tweets, it mentions a couple of KSM's relatives, as far as being in Guantanamo Bay, and as far as it relates to this. So we'll come back to this, but this is picking up right before the 20th anniversary of September 11th as well. So
this whole slate of stories here, we will do a much longer form analysis of. For example, media tick up in terms of movie representations. What's fact and what's fiction in worth? The Netflix movie stars Michael Keaton as the man in charge of the 9/11 Victim Compensation Fund. Is it accurate? It talks about Kenneth Feinberg, the 9/11 paymaster, also the paymaster for the Zapruder film, apparently, and all Agent Orange and the Corexit disaster in down in the Gulf. All of these things. So there's a whole background there that it's interesting that this is being depicted now. Then we move on to more media depictions. Get these out of here. Get out of here, New York Times. Okay, there we go. Spike Lee re-edits HBO September 11th series that features conspiracists. An episode of the 8-hour documentary series has drawn criticism for giving a platform to people who have long peddled, debunked claims about what caused the towers to quote-unquote collapse. How many weaponized terms can you fit in a subtitle?
Right.
Peddled, debunked, collapse, claims, conspiracists. It's all a mess here.
And there are still some people out there who think the New York Times is some type of legitimate opposition to both, to 11/9 and all the things we've seen over the last few years. And it's just, but yeah, this we'll talk in depth about this. There's a lot of things involving this whole Spike Lee, Richard Gage, who was profiled in the who's supposed to be in the documentary. I believe he's taken out of it. We'll get into that in a long form here in the next couple of days. But a lot of layers surrounding this, and there's in Spike Lee himself, and we'll get into that at a later time.
And here's an interesting story that you found. Get out of my way, ad. From Vanity Fair, Spike Lee's 9/11 doc didn't just include conspiracy theories; it promoted them. Dun dun dun! By Jordan Hoffman. And there's Spike Lee. Spike Lee's documentary, NYC Epicenter's 9/11 through 2021 and a half, was, when I watched it via previews links sent to me by HBO, 8 hours long in total. 7.5 of those hours where I felt an exuberant, maximalist mad rush of a love letter to New York from one of the city's greatest artists. And then they talk about what you'd been talking about, Greg, about the inclusion of the 9/11 conspiracy theorists.
And real quick, I believe also there's a COVID conversation in there from Richard Gage, which kind of links together September 11th with the COVID narrative. And even in here, there's it also mentions one more aspect. I'll mention this real quick. Is in the episode dealing with COVID, I believe there's black celebrity rap or hip hop artist who questions as far as like the COVID narrative. Then Van Jones of CNN is used as like a counter to that. So it sounds very interesting altogether with this whole documentary, this whole series. But at the very least, the September 11th information contained in this was a bridge too far for a lot of people. Also, there you see Bobby McIlvaine being featured.
Interesting, and I didn't know that he took Bobby McIlvaine took Toni Morrison's graduate level class. Very interesting. I mean, that's the son, Bob McIlvaine's son, Bobby McIlvaine. And then typical 4chan level anti-Semitism against Richard Gage. And we'll get into all of this. And meanwhile, then you have the quote unquote skeptics that are their own cultists they're the anti-conspiracy theorists of sort of a similar kind of resonance of the worst of the quote unquote conspiracy theorist movement. Brian Dunning, 9/11 Truthers 20 years later, that really gets into the accusations of conspiracism and anti-Semitism. And maybe when we post this, I think what we'll do is we'll post this as we'll keep it as an unlisted video, and then we'll post it on the link on Patreon, and we'll include the links to these stories. And this is just, we should go through this too when we do our long form, because the level of the disinformation, I feel like, has actually gotten lazier and lazier over time in terms of the quote unquote debunkers.
And you've kept up with the quote unquote debunkers for quite a while, and that's something a lot of people, including myself, don't do nearly enough. So that's very appreciated that you follow their talking points and what they're putting out there, because we need to know what people like that are saying. So very much props to you for doing that over the years, Jeremy.
I'm just peddling anti-conspiracy theory hypotheses, Greg. I'm just peddling them. Debunked. No. All right, and then finally, this is linked to unraveling anti-Semitic 9/11 conspiracy theories. Goes way back to the ADLs, one of their first ADLs takes.
This is when it was published.
So remember the timing of all of this too. This is when, for example, Les Wexner, the patron of Jeffrey Epstein, is working with Frank Luntz to figure out how to do the public relations framing of the Iraq War as not in Israel's interest, but in American interests. And it's just saying that fact, I guess, now would be considered a Iraq War anti-Semitic conspiracy theory. However, I'm asserting, as a Jewish American patriot of conscience during this Rosh Hashanah, that we're not having that anymore. We're not doing that. We're going to have political conversations about facts and analysis without using the canard of the anti-Semitic, quote unquote, tropes as a way to avoid factual questions.
And the classic tropes, if you look through this document, immediately within a couple of pages are mentioned. The protocols of the Elders of Zion is mentioned. The National Alliance, which was William Pierce's neo-Nazi group, which the author of the Turner Diaries, which wrote about the race war and supposedly inspired Timothy McVeigh. They're mentioned right away in this article. So it's like you see the classic tropes, and you can see, like, for example, something like the protocols, just how much people within these realms, like some people we've even associated with, not too closely but loosely over the years, fall into just going right into things like leading from legitimate questions about to going into like all these things that are just simply that organizations like the ADL that put out these types of pamphlets actually love and thrive off of. So I mean, it's very interesting reading this in 2003 and still seeing like the same types of talking points and tropes out there, even way more perpetuated now than they were then. I mean, so
Yes, and thank you for pointing that out, Greg. And as we finish up here, I would like to reemphasize what you pointed out, that what we were working to do here is extricate the facts from the fact that they have been cloaked. You can basically see earlier on, the ADL is quoting Islam Web that says that no Jews or Israelis were killed. Remember that whole disinformation trope when the questions of the Israeli art student spying, the Israeli company spying, the quote unquote Jewish ownership, not just the Jewish ownership, but the Netanyahu friend ownership, the heavily
actually
Zionist partisan
names.
ownership. Yes.
Actually naming names rather than just trying to collectively blame this on a group of people, which is what organizations like the Anti-Defamation League want people to do.
Yes. All right. And so what is the term that you like to use, Greg, for what we're trying to do in this realm of analysis? Not re-legitimize. Destigmatize.
Re-legitimize and destigmatize, yes.
All right. Well, thank you all so much for joining us. We will be back to cover this a little bit more long form. And until next time, AnteDote. We out.
So long.
Bye, y'all.
We must speak the truth about terror. Let us never tolerate outrageous conspiracy theories, malicious lies that attempt to shift the blame away from the terrorists themselves.
Huh? What happens? I tell you what happens. Blam!
I have a window that looks directly at the World Trade Center, and I saw...
No collusion!
Shit's getting way too complicated for me.